Must have became a corporal again
Oh,
in Texas, so that must be 22.
so there you go. And my dad is going to share his story with you of his experiences during World War II, so I do ask you to give him your undivided attention. And I have to tell you, secret, Dad, this is my favorite class.
Wow. If you're her favorite, you're special because I saw a lot of wonderful kids today.
That's true. He likes you guys. He thinks that the kids in the school like his school.
He thinks, or like no.
He likes me. Anyway, so please welcome Gordon Pappas, Mr. Pappas.
I haven't been in a classroom for 30 years, so bear with me if I've forgotten some of the techniques. I retired in '83 after teaching 37 years in high school, math and music. But I'm going to tell you about things that happened 70 years ago, 70. And they say history is what you remember. Now, if you can remember by reading, that's one way. That's kind of hard. But you remember most of when you do something or experience something, you know. That's easier. And if my being here helps you to remember 70 years ago, and it'll be better. It'll impress itself on your memory better, I think. I hope. Anyway, 70 years ago, I graduated from high school at the age of 18, as you'll soon be in a year or two, I suppose. And at that time in my life, I remember very vividly that the United States was not involved in any war of any kind. There was war going on in Europe because we remember that, I remember that England had declared war on Germany because of their invasion of Poland. And since England had a treaty with Poland, they were compelled to go and defend their brother, Poland, and declared war on England. We weren't supposed to go to war. We had a lot of people in this country that didn't believe in it. Thought we should be neutrals, keep ourselves away from European intercession. So a lot of people didn't. We heard rumors of things that were going on in Europe. People came back from tours, said the fascists in Germany are doing this, doing that. We could hardly believe it, but it didn't involve us. Just like today, what goes on in the Middle East doesn't really involve you or your fellow friends too much, unless you're going to go in the army and maybe go over there. But it's a long ways away, and it didn't involve us. So I went to the local teachers' college, which was easy and economically available to me. We were a middle-class family. My father owned a little grocery store, and I could stay at home and go to college. Spent my first years in 1940 and 41 as a freshman in teachers college. They had a good music department, and I liked music, so I joined the music faculty student body and was involved. In 41, after I finished my freshman year, in December, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. You probably read about that, heard about it, remember hearing about it. And we declared war on Japan, and then right after that, soon after that, Hitler and Germany declared war on the United States, and so we became involved in the European conflict in January of 1942. By that time, I was back in college with my second year as a sophomore. Well, right away, my fellow classmates, especially the boys, the men, joined up or were drafted, because we had a draft in those days. Roosevelt had said we're going to have to draft an army. If we're going to go to war, we need a lot of men. So you were called up by the numbers. My number did not come up, but even if it did, I was excused because I was going to college. If you were enrolled in college, you were exempt from the draft as long as you were going to school. And so I finished the second year in 1942, and that summer came, and I was looking around and my classmates, especially the boys, were all gone, a lot of them, hardly any left. And I was still there, and I thought, do I want to go back and start a third year or join the conflict and become, I was patriotic, and we all believed in what we were doing in those days. So what I did was I volunteered to enlist. They called it volunteer enlistment. And Dad took me down to the bus station and joined the Army in August of 1942. Sent to Fort Snelling in Minneapolis, and then by train down to Oklahoma to the 88th Division, which was an infantry division, a new one. Just been, it was called the All Draft Division, one of the first divisions that composed almost entirely of draftees, run by regular Army troops, guys that had joined the Army years before and now came back to train the draftee division. Went into basic training. You know, you've heard of basic training. It's about 8 months long. And in an infantry division, it's mostly learning how to take care of yourself in the wild, in the open, sleeping at night on the ground, learning how to keep clean and healthy, taking walks every day. Every day we started out with a 1 or 2 mile walk, you know, blisters on your feet, came back, took care of them. Then it went to 5, 10 miles a day. Sometimes we took our lunch, went out 20 miles, came back in the evening after the sun had set. Eventually went up to 30 miles. We learned how to walk. Boy, saved me all my life. I've loved to walk. You learn to walk. It's healthy. It's one of the most marvelous exercises one can experience. Well, the months went by and I was homesick, lonely. I'd never been away from Minnesota, my home. Duluth was where I was born. But 8 months away, and they gave me a furlough. I finally went home for a week or two, I think, to visit. But it was all by train travel in those days, no airplanes. It took you about 5 hours, 5 or 6 hours at least from Oklahoma to take a train up to Minneapolis or Duluth. Anyway, one day came when they offered tests to those that had a certain IQ, and I was enlisted to take the test, and I passed it. The Army decided they had too many men, they didn't need to, and the colleges were being deserted, so the colleges were complaining, where are all our students? We don't have any. So they sent us all back to colleges all over the country. I was assigned to New Mexico A&MA, Agricultural and Mechanical Arts School. That's in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I had never been to New Mexico in my life, of course. I was still away from home. So about 1,000 of us were assigned to New Mexico A&MA. It was a marvelous experience. Up 5,000 feet altitude, wonderful climate, beautiful scenery, and I enjoyed it. Every night we lived like cadets in the dormitories, marched to lunch, studied in the rooms at night. When 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock came, we had to go to bed, sleep, regular hours and everything like that. On the weekends we had free. We'd go down to El Paso and visit Juarez and buy some beer or wine and bring it home and stuff like that. Or go across into La Mesa to have Mexican food, which we'd never had before, especially us Minnesota boys. I remember the colonel, the captain of our dormitory, telling us, now you Minnesota boys, you're going to have to take a shower every day. He said, we had taken baths every Saturday night in Minnesota. That's all we did in those days. So learning to take a shower was one thing. Then the months went by, 7, 8 months. We became accustomed to our life as a cadet in New Mexico. When the Army decided, or Eisenhower, somebody high up, Marshall maybe, the Supreme General, He needed more men. He was going to invade Europe. This was 1944. In March of 1944, we were disbanded. All the colleges sent the cadets back to the troops. And I was assigned to an armored division in Texas. In Arlington, Texas, not Arlington, Abilene, Texas, the 12th Armored Division. An armored division is like the old cavalry divisions of the First World War. They rode horses in those days, you know. But an armored division, in place of the horses, they had trucks and tanks and jeeps and all kinds of mobile. We didn't ride horses anymore, we rode. And I was in the band because I was a musician still. Had played in the band even in college while I was in New Mexico. We had a little band. So I was assigned to the 12th Armored Division band in Headquarters Division. Headquarters had the administration of the division. By the way, a division is a lot of men. Over 10,000 men, 10,000 to 15,000 men in every division of the Army. And we had 30 or 40 divisions in our Army. Lots of divisions, lots of men. So the Headquarters Division had cooks, a cook team, and the band was assigned, the headquarters administration staff, the general and all his helpers and all that. It was a nice headquarters to be in. We had 3 regiments of tank battalions, armored group number 1, A, B, and C. A, B, and C. You put 2 into action and you keep 1 in reserve. That was the idea of the Army. And we played during recreation periods for the Army, and we played for formal parades and guard mounts, even local events that took place. The band was on call. We often were asked to go and play for civic ceremonies. I remember I was assigned, there was a big barbecue going on in a neighboring town, celebration of some kind, so they sent the band over to participate in that. Also, as a trumpeter, we had 8 trumpets in the band. We had to play the trumpets for the whole camp. One trumpeter was assigned to play all the bugle calls every day, a different one. That meant getting up in the morning at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock and playing first call, second call, mess call, all the calls, you know. We learned all that stuff. That was our job. And we would go on maneuvers. We were getting ready to go overseas, so we would go out in the woods and live for a few days, practice how we were going to operate during war. Well, what does the band do during war? Well, it doesn't play their instruments, surely, but during war they would pack up our instruments and get them safe until we were ready to use them again. And they would assign us to the military police. Military police had about 100 men in it, and the band had 60 more, so there was 164, so forth, military police. Did I say something or do something?
You just have to move around.
Oh, I'm not moving around enough. Okay. So that's what we did. But even on maneuvers, we played concerts sometimes, and that was kind of fun. It was a good life until we got on the train to go overseas. And this was in, oh, by the way, I should tell you that March was when we were assigned to Abilene. In June, March, April, May, June, that was when, June 6th,
D-Day.
Eisenhower decided he was going to invade Europe on that day, remember? And he invaded France. Here's the map of France. And he invaded in the Normandy beaches right along here in this, what is called the Cherbourg Peninsula. Cherbourg is a little city right at the end of a huge seaport, which was occupied by the Germans. Now the Germans didn't think the Americans were going to do this here at this place. They thought they were going to come across the channel and invade Europe here. So they had most of their armored forces, heavy forces, up here in defense, ready for the Americans when they came. But the Americans didn't invade here. Instead, they embarked from here across the Yankee on June 6th and invaded here. I was still in Texas at this time, of course. I learned all this later because I studied it. I'm still studying it. We're still finding out things that happened in World War II, believe it or not. And it's amazing. It's an amazing time in history. But the invaded 3 beaches. The British forces, mostly in down here in the southern beaches. The Americans went in the middle beaches, and the British were supposed to take this city of Calais, which is a big city in Normandy, right? This is the province of Normandy right here. A lot of agriculture, fruit, wine growing country, beautiful country. But the British got stuck. Calais was pretty well defended, probably the best defended of any. Instead, the American forces came around and came down and liberated Cherbourg. They needed the seaport. What did they need the seaport for? Well, they were landing supplies on the beaches, but that's a hard place to bring the big transport ships in. It's better to go to a seaport. Cherbourg was a better place. A few months went by and they finally liberated they beat the Germans out of this whole peninsula. So by the time October came and we crossed the ocean, we were going to land at Cherbourg, the armored division with its thousands of vehicles and supplies, military personnel.
Dad, will you explain, because I thought this was interesting. You mentioned that the Germans thought they were going to come over, you see where the English Channel is, where it's really
Up here in Calais. Yeah.
Explain why the Germans thought they were going to come over there.
Well, it's the closest way. Wouldn't you, if you were looking for landing millions of troops?
And what had the Allies set up in that? Didn't they?
Oh, they had set up camps out of cardboard and plywood up here that looked like tents and tanks and stuff. So the Germans flying and bombing London this way saw those, and they thought most of the forces that the Americans were arranging to invade Europe were gathering up here in this area and going to invade Calais. It was a dummy ruse, you understand? It worked. Because even Rommel, the famous general of the Germans, was leading his force, was the main general up here, and he had it all here. So when the Americans finally decided this was where they were going to land, the Germans had to move all this equipment down here to fight them. And it took them weeks to get that stuff down there. So that was why we were successful in landing in Normandy. You saw the film Saving Private Ryan, probably, and that adventure probably duplicated the things that I remember about the battles as well as any did. The sounds in that movie of the tanks moving on the ground sounded threatening, and oh my God, those tanks, they weighed hundreds of tons, you know. You hear garbage trucks coming in the morning sometimes, don't you? Getting your garbage, wakes you up. Well, a German Panzer tank will move ground for miles. You can hear it coming for miles away, and it's a huge, terrible, frightening sound. That was duplicated in the movie pretty well, I thought. Anyway, we were coming across the ocean with our ships full of our vehicles, and by this time, Patton, the Third Army, by the way, the Third Army was led by Patton. He was to come, he had broken through out of the Cherbourg Peninsula and was coming across France, north of Paris. He had made a breakthrough, and he was successful in pushing the Germans back. The English troops had bogged down here trying to capture Calais, so they were slow. They were supposed to come. Eisenhower had formed 3 armies to conquer Europe. The First Army, led by Montgomery, was to go up north through the Low Countries, Netherlands, Belgium, and then invade the northern part of Germany. The Third Army, led by Bradley, was to go through the middle of France and into the Rhine area. This is the Rhine River, which goes up through and empties into the Baltic Sea up here, around there. Starts in Switzerland in the Alps. The biggest river divides France, Belgium from Germany. Anyway, the 7th Army was formed to the Alsace Lorraine area down here. And when we finally ended up in Europe, we ended up in the 7th Army, and combined with the French, who came in an invasion of Marseille in the southern part of France, December of that year, they invaded and joined with us up here in the 7th Army. We were to push the Germans back in this area. 3rd Army here, 7th Army here, 1st Army here. We were supposed to go from Cherbourg and join the 7th Army. But on the way across the ocean, Patton, who was our best tank commander in those days, had lost a lot of vehicles in fighting, and they lay burning and laying in France still today, I'm sure. So he needed replacements, and they took all our military armor and trucks and vehicles off the ships and gave them to Patton right away so he could continue his push. Well, we didn't have any vehicles anymore, so they sent us to England. This was in August of 1944. So we had to stay in England for a couple of months until enough tanks and trucks to replace those that had been sent to Patton could be joined. We were lucky because we got new trucks and new tanks. Our tanks back in those days, the first part of the war, were armed with 75 millimeter cannons in front, you know, which became artillery mostly whenever we needed them. The Germans' Panzers had 88 millimeter. That's a bigger shell by, 9 millimeters. It's a bigger shell around in diameter. And one shot out of a Panzer tank could destroy a Sherman tank, put it right out of action. One shot, right in, no matter where it hit, put it out of action. So the Germans had the advantage. Their tanks were driven by diesels too, diesel fuel, which smelled terribly, but it was cheaper for them, I guess. And we were using gasoline back in those days. Gasoline was only 25 cents a gallon. It wasn't very expensive. And we were hauling gasoline over there by the billions and billions of liters, gallons. But when we got the new tanks, we got Pershing tanks, which were now armed with 90 millimeter cannons. So we got an advantage by waiting 2 months. And the factories in America were building better tanks to match the German Panzers. Well, we finally landed at Cherbourg in October of 1944, and we rushed across France. We didn't go to Paris because we were not allowed to go to Paris. Paris was allowed, the French troops were allowed to go into Paris because we figured that was their country and they probably should have the honor of entertaining. Later, Paris became a great recreational city, and when we were on relief, we could go back to Paris and visit it. But I never did. I never did see Paris in that time of my life. However, we went north of Paris to Nancy, where we stopped and got ready, and we were going to enter the battle the next week or two. We were asked to choose a buddy. The first thing they say, when you go into battle, you have to have a buddy. So you want a buddy who you can depend upon. Well, you find out, who can you depend upon? Who's the guy that you would choose to save your life if you were going to be captured or in danger? It turns out that the same guys were always chosen to be the buddies. I mean, everybody wanted this guy. He was better than the other guy. Very few wanted me, for instance. And I wanted him too. So finding a good buddy was difficult, but that's the way we did it. So in November, we went into battle, And our first battles were down here in the Alsace Lorraine area. Now, Alsace Lorraine is an area of France that had been fought over for many generations, many years. Sometimes it was German, sometimes it was French. The people that lived there spoke both German and French, didn't matter. They knew how to live in that country. The Rhine going along here was the border. So at that time, Germany had occupied it, and our job was to get the Germans out of there and back across the Rhine into Germany where they belonged. So that was the first few months of the war, October, November, December. We were in the Alsace-Lorraine area. We finally liberated most of the cities in the Alsace, lost a lot of men, lost a lot of troops. And then I can remember the Christmas, 1944. We had a few days rest, and they issued us nice turkey dinners. We got fresh from America flown over, fresh food. It was unbelievable, the supplies that were being rushed across the country. You know who's driving those trucks mostly? The African Americans. The Army was still segregated in those days. No black troops were in the fighting, but they were assigned to drive the supply trucks from the ports like Cherbourg and Calais by now to supply the forces. And we had fresh food Christmas Day, I can remember, and also liquor. The officers were given a shot of liquor, or a bottle of liquor, I guess, and the main troops, the privates and the sergeants, you know, what do they call them? Non-commissioned officers. The non-commissioned officers and the troops were given beer as a Christmas present. Also, we got new jackets and new boots because snow was on the ground and we were cold. Overcoats, we got overcoats, keep warm. We were well supplied. It's unbelievable. But then something happened around Christmas that changed everything. Hitler decided he was going to make a final push to get rid of the American army, split them up. And the Belgian bulge appeared. And he marshaled a whole bunch of tank divisions north of us, about 100 miles north of us. We were down here. And up here in Belgium, he decided he was going to push through Belgium and recapture the point of Antwerp, the port of Antwerp. Very important. He was going to capture a lot of American supplies also and fight his way out of this terrible trap that he was getting in. He was going to split the American armies in half by dividing them. The line was thinly defended all along here, thinly. He captured a lot of American forces. A lot of Americans became prisoners at that time in the war. We were still fighting down here. One division was sent in to hold the line, and that was the 101st Paratroop Division. They had been successful in Africa before, months before. A wonderful, it was like a Ranger Division. You read about the 101st. There was Battle of the Brotherhoods. What was it?
Band of Brothers?
Band of Brothers was the story of the 101st Paratroop. They had been paratrooped in Normandy, back here, and they were successful. They had learned how to fight, and they lost a lot of men too, but they were well trained. So they held the line, and they held the Germans back. They kept the German army from advancing.